I have her face right at the right height. So this is what's called site size painting. Generally, it's done with still lives or a live model where you paint the same size as your reference, and you stand the same distance away from your reference. And in this case, I am okay. If you can talk louder or get closer to the phone. Let me see. Maybe if I put the phone volume, did that make any difference putting the phone volume louder, or just doesn't? Just I just need to talk louder. Okay, so I'm going to get closer to the phone, and so I'm painting what's called site size. So the panel and the a little. Okay, the panel and the reference image are exactly the same size. So what I can do is measure on the monitor my different landmarks. So if I measure the eye, for example, I can mix a little bit of color to put down to begin with. So if I'm measuring the eye from the edge to right now the pupil. So that's going to be somewhere around here. And I can measure from the top down. And that is going to be right there. I can measure again. One. Yep. Just over a little. So I know that her eyeball is going to be right there. And then I can measure her other eye this the same way. Measure again. The measuring part, this is the part that kind of goes a little slowly. But once you get your landmarks in and you do a little drawing, then the painting actually goes a lot faster. You have a little more confidence that you're painting things where they need to go. Just putting in some light reference. I'm gonna grab the corner of her cheek and her chin, right where her chin turns, as a landmark. So this needs to be around here, and I can either measure from the top or the bottom at this point, right where it turns. It's not a real hard point in space. It's a little easier if I say like the bottom of where the ear comes up and meets her jawline. That's more of a kind of a definite point. Let me do it from the top first. So the ear to the jawline. And I can eyeball these in. A lot of paintings I do eyeball it first and then I correct it, but just want to just get to the point tonight. So looking like right. Okay. Almost doesn't matter what color I'm using here. All of it's going to be overpainted as I'm working. Just grabbing a little bit of color that's on the palette already. Now her eyebrow is there. Let's make it a little more defined. Again, I end up moving these things all around as I'm working. Just usually I'm trying to work towards a likeness. Most of my paintings have a fair amount of likeness to the final painting. I mean to the photo. And I think I didn't make her eyebrow high enough. So at the highest point of her eyebrow is right up here. Yeah, that's a little off. So there, I'm going to mix some color the actual closer to the flesh tone so that I can cover over some of those lines. That's usually how I jump into the painting, is where I'm covering over my mistakes, and that just gets me to start to put down some real paint. So now I need to actually get closer to her eyebrow color, which is mixing a little bit of orange, black, to get kind of more of a brown, a little more orange. So the way my palette works is I do a combination of what's called tint tone shade color mixing and complementary color mixing. It's really a hybrid of two different ideas. One is sort of an impressionist idea of mixing complementary colors together to get to neutralize more saturated colors. And tint tone shade is where you mix white, black, or a combination of white and black with the colors to alter the intensity of the color. And the tint tone shade idea gives you a much higher intensity of color in the finished painting. It actually is a little counterintuitive because you would think that an impressionist palette would give you higher key color, but it doesn't. It's when you're mixing from across the palette that you tend to neutralize the colors more. And actually, I don't even think most impressionist painters actually realize that they're working to make duller colors. I am going to keep the white of the eye really blue to begin with, because in the end, I don't want the white of the eye to be white. I want it to be, I want to leave some room for the highlights in her face to be the lightest light. I do see her eye color as being kind of a bluish green with a little bit of gray, but again, want to start with a little more color than it actually has, because in the painting process and correcting, it tends to go a little bit grayer. And I'm going to have to get some black in there. Where her iris is below the eyelid, there's a little bit of shadow there, and that helps give a little bit of depth to maintain that color change or value change. And then generally speaking, if the light source is coming from above, in this case it's coming from the upper left hand side, the lower part of the iris is going to be lighter in color because of how the light travels through the lens of your eye. Makes that part of the eye a little bit lighter. So you're actually getting light that's reflecting through the eye. And then, a lot of instructors will say, don't put your highlights in right away, but I just can't help it. Sometimes I just like to sense the glassiness of the eye. I don't care if it's in the wrong place. I always can move it later. Sometimes I'll repaint an eye 100 times in a painting, and I might as well just even remeasure at this point to see if I'm even close to where it needs to be. It's not too far off, or at least laterally it's not too bad. Okay, let's see. Yep, that's in the right place. And now I can start to put in a little bit of closer to the right value here in the right color, so that I am going to get that sense of it actually looking like the white of an eye. I'm not being too careful or exact yet, probably to my own detriment, but I'm just trying to keep it loose to begin with and get it moving along, so that I started about 8:35. I don't know how long I'm going to paint for. Usually when I'm painting this late at night, I can go on for several hours, But you guys are joining and watching, so I I don't know how much patience you guys will have, whether you'll want to go and come back or just watch for a little while. I can already start to sense the depth in the eye. That is, that helps me paint. Um, you're sort of painting on two levels at the same time, or at least I do. I'm trying to maintain the shapes, the relative shapes in from the photo. That's a two-dimensional idea, shape to shape, and get some accuracy in shape. But then, as the painting starts to look more dimensional, you can have this feeling like you're actually painting on the sides, tops, and bottoms of elements in the painting, and that really does become helpful when you start to see those things, because it's easier to correct when you see that those things are working or that they're off, because you really do feel like, oh yes, the side of this eye, it's just turning this fast, and I kind of like it. I usually don't get there until towards the end of the painting, where the painting really starts to feel dimensional, but if it starts doing that right away, I like it. Really makes me feel like I am turning the forms of the face and have a little bit more control over what's going on. How's that looking so far? Are you guys seeing? Is that interesting? The way this is coming along. I think I'm using too soft a brush for the beginning here. I need to get a really big brush going. So I was using a round. I think it's like a number 4 round. Can't read it. If you can see it there. And I'm switching to I really can't read the numbers on this thing, but it's like a 10 flat or something like that. And that'll allow me to get a little bit more paint on more quickly. And a flat gives a kind of different feel to the painting. If you use it for a whole painting, the painting will have more of a chiseled look to it, because you're really kind of creating very square shape strokes, and that can give it a little bit more of a sculptural, chiseled feel. I'm gonna lighten up part of that eyebrow a little bit. It is really a orangey black or brown. I hate to use the word brown, but because it really doesn't describe the color that well. But a reddish neutral, I guess. Can have a little more red in there. And I'm seeing around the eye, I'm seeing some reds and a little bit of greens, and sometimes I like to exaggerate those a little bit, so that there's more interest in the face, throwing a little bit of yellow in the color. And it's not green enough for me. That'd be a little more exciting. Okay, there. Really get some green in. And these shapes in the face are really kind of blending together. I might change the color, even though they're like very close to the same value, so that there is a sense of direction change. But I still want to maintain the fact that those elements are grouping together visually. So, two contradicting ideas, that they're grouping together, but they're also facing in different directions. And need to widen that eye a little bit, get a little more white in there. It's just all adjusting, these little adjustments. And sometimes just have to slow down a little too. Get that kind of line. Okay. Right. And a little bit of the eyelash. And gonna widen that pupil a little too. I mean the iris. Okay, that's looking good. Has a little bit of softness to it. It's not looking exactly like the photo, but has a nice feel to it. So we'll see how that holds up as I do the rest of the face. So you do start to get a sense of dimensionality there. Here it's a little bit sloppy, so it's a little hard to read, but there is some transition values as you get towards the this brow ridge here, as you get near the brow ridge. And got to make that a little bit more okay. And then there is a highlight. This is one area where I'm going to try to get a little closer to my lightest light, because you get some reflected light right in that spot and above the eyebrow right here. And I'm going to have to adjust that later, a little bit later in the painting. Okay. Are you guys hearing me okay? Okay, I'm gonna keep on going here. That green that I put in there, it's too green. So I just want to bring it a little closer to that other color, add a little more red. At some point I'll be able to do these live demos where I have a camera pointing at the palette, I have another camera pointed at the photo, and a third camera pointed at the painting. And so you guys can get a good shot of all three as I'm working, but I'm not there yet. Technically, it's a little bit challenging to do all that, and I'm just learning. There are some YouTube live settings that allow you to use different cameras, but I'm not sure yet about multiple cameras. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm working my way out from this eye that I've established here. I know it's the right place on the panel where I want it. I like the way it's looking. For the most part, the values around it are pretty good. And so as I work out, I'll be making some subtle adjustments, and just trust that all of it's going to fit together. Sometimes I like to paint where I put in kind of the mass colors of the painting, and so the general color of the whole face, which would be called the halftone, so the general color of the light side of the face, and then the shadow side, and then really work to get the edge or the transition between the two right, and then go in and put in the details. But on this particular painting, I feel like picking a spot and working out around it, and so that the whole painting seems to appear out of one central spot. Kind of, if you see a time lapse of this, it would be like the whole painting is growing from one place. I can start to put in the ear, and the ear is partially in shadow. So the top of the ear is going to be a darker value. I don't even know if that's the right color, but it's a good start. I like to work on a white panel to begin with, and I may experiment at some point putting down a neutral color. A lot of artists like to put down a tone because it's easier to judge your values if you start off with a tone panel. I've just gotten used to painting off a white background, so I just know I guess more intuitively, I know the color that I want. And so, also, a lot of artists will pre-mix a lot of their flesh tones. I try not to do that just because there's no such thing as flesh tones. I know I said that. I'm I'm getting into very dangerous territory here by saying there's no such thing as flesh tones. Um, Basically, colors that you see are a combination of a local color and the color of the light that hits it, and that's never going to be the same between two photos or two live setups. You're never going to have the exact same colors. Um, if you pre-mix your flesh tones, what you end up having is all your paintings kind of look all the same after a while. And what you're also missing is the variety of colors that are really there. Um, the yellows and the greens and purples that you would naturally see. Like here, there's something that's just a little bit greener right here, coming off the turn of the cheek into the nose. And if I premix my colors, I really couldn't just jump in with something that was much greener there. I'm going a little bit too dark here, so I'm going to try to go lighter and more red, which is hard because I have to mix really cleanly to get that. I can come back in later and correct that, but and I'm just going to go in with some straight white here. I'm painting what's called alla prima, which is wet into wet painting. Alla prima means kind of all in one go, meaning you're not doing an underpainting, you're not glazing on top, you're just painting all at once. And so you have to be able to paint in a way that you're approximating the color, what the color is going to be based on the color you have on the brush and the color that you already have down, because the two are going to be mixing together. And so it's always a little bit of this kind of estimation calculation to figure out what the color should be. I am going to throw in a little bit of black around the ear. That's going to help give me my darkest dark and help me see the values a little bit better. So you can see what looked very dark at the tip of the ear starts to look lighter as I throw some dark around it. Okay. Just do a little measuring. That's very close to the edge of the panel, and I don't have it that close. So let's see if I can throw some brighter red in there, or tip of her ear. This is where there's a little bit of blood in the ears, especially if it's cold out. Your blood goes there, and to the nose and the cheeks. Something physiological there. I forget why. To keep you warm? I don't remember. And okay. So what I don't know from what I put down so far is where are the landmarks in the nose. So I am going to do a little bit more measuring at the very corner of the eye. And this edge of the nose is just vertically just outside of that. So here, and the bottom of the nose. All this measuring's it's important if I'm going to get a sense of the likeness where all those landmarks land. And it speeds the painting along because, again, like I said, I have a lot more confidence that I'm putting down strokes where they are going to be in the end. And I've just learned over the last few months, I've had a couple of paintings go really wrong where I didn't have enough of the measuring done correctly. And I have a video on that actually. There's a video of a woman named Zanetta, a I want to say she's Russian, but I'm not sure. Um, can't remember offhand. But anyway, she lives in London. She's a model, and I did a painting of her from Sketchy. And I had to repaint her face maybe 6 or 7 times before I got it right. And part of that is that I didn't take the time to do a real good measuring job. Okay, getting a little bit of green in there, and there's this crease underneath her eye that's actually much darker than when I painted it. And then there's some green coming in there too. Okay, yeah, and I see if I squint is the most important tool that the artist has in his tool bag, because it takes what you painted and blurs it so that you can see how you're doing. It's similar to like stepping back and looking, but blurring, since I'm sitting in a chair and it's hard for me to get up a lot while I'm painting, squinting is the next best thing. It tends to bring it blurs out all the details so that you can judge the values much better, or the placement of things. I have this red area here alongside the nose. I established that it's right there. So it looks too low, but yeah, I guess that's right. I think I need to get the nostril in there to really start to judge. And I'm switching to a smaller flat for the nostril, so I can just be a little bit more exact about the shape. I'm just gonna put a dot there and then measure it, because I am not confident in it. Oh, that's pretty good. And this edge, that looks pretty good. Okay, so now a little more confident. This is where the nostril is. There's some red around it. That red is, you'll see in a lot of portraits, and you'll see it in the photo, is essentially the light that's passing through the nostril and lighting the skin around it, and also a little bit of the blood in your skin that's in that area. So the combination of two can make the inside of the nostril look very red. And I'm getting too close to where I would put the highlight. I am not going to wait. I want to see where that highlight is. So just going to put in a little more of the shapes around there. And the light underneath the nose, where this light source that's to the upper right is hitting this plane very strongly. And then there's also a highlight as it gets closer to the upper lip. And I am going to put in a little bit stronger the shadow that's alongside of the nose. It's kind of a reddish, red and black together. Okay, and I actually, before I go and put in the highlights, I want to maybe get an indication of the other nostril. And I am putting that pretty dark, but what I don't have is the values around it quite right yet. All this is, painting is a, how do you say it, is an exercise in adjustments. It's all about putting something down and then seeing if it looks right and then changing it until it does look right. And as you do more paintings, your judgment gets better, both in what you put down initially and how well you are at adjusting it. So I'm still somewhere in the middle. Like sometimes I get it right the first time, and sometimes I adjust it right after that. But usually I have to adjust it 30 or 40 times. And I want that highlight in there now. So I have the right brush. I have this smaller flat, and I can get that highlight in. Generally want it thicker paint because I want it not to mix so much with the paint underneath. I really want it to sit on the surface, and that really gives it that quality that it's reflecting light. The same up here, but I have to get the darks around it before it reads correctly. And it's a little bit lighter here. I'm having a little bit of, this is where the 10-tone shade color mixing comes in. I have black and a little bit of green to get into this part that's just underneath the eyelid. Sometimes when I'm painting, I'm just painting shape to shape and I don't even realize what I'm painting. And other times it's helpful to name what something is. If I say in my brain, this is the under part of the eyelid where this corner turns, then that's really becomes very helpful in painting it. Sometimes it gets in the way though. If you name something and you have a preconceived notion of what it looks like, sometimes if you know it's the ear and you know it should be, the top of the ear should be close to the eye, then you may end up painting it in the wrong place because the angle of the head may mean that that top edge of the ear actually is higher or lower. Oh, painting all over this. My monitor is just one big smudge of leftover paint. So the top of the ear is aligned with somewhere in the middle of that that eyelid. Just as an example. Okay, so I'm going to keep this moving along and get some of the colors in the forehead. So just from experience, foreheads are going to be more orange than the middle section of the face. The jaw, the muzzle, around the mouth is going to be greener and yellower. I've heard Jeffrey Watts, who runs Watts Atelier, is a painting school or a art school out of, I forget what they are, somewhere in the Southwest. He calls it the Neapolitan effect, which is, I find that really cute, but it's a good way of thinking about it. If you have a orange stripe across the forehead, reddish stripe in the middle, and then greener stripe at the bottom. And this isn't going to be true with everyone's face and every lighting situation, but it does give you sort of something to look for to make better choices about the color mixing. I'm going to do that eyebrow a little higher and that turn. Again, useful to measure. I'm glad I'm doing a smaller panel because that bigger panel would have slowed me down tonight, because I would have had to move it up and down on the monitor to see different parts of the painting. So there's some red in the shadow around the eye. I want to make sure that I get enough color in there to begin with, as it's easier for it to go too dark without enough color in it. And then I get the outer edge of this nose. And this is where I get a little bit of the dimensionality, where the nose transitions from dark to light. You get a little more volume there. So I was saying, when I paint shape to shape, and I'm not really naming things, I'm really just focused on making sure that all the relative shapes are in the right place together. And then if I'm thinking more about the form and how it's turning in space and the anatomy, that's sort of a different mental exercise. It also means that I had a teacher, Laurie Madden, who said, and I'm sure lots of teachers have said this, paint what you know, not what you see. or you're doing actually a combination of both, is that you're painting both what you see, but also what you know. And I always found is the more you know, the more you see. And I know it sounds like I'm talking gibberish, and I usually am, but this, I know what I'm talking about. It's the idea that your knowledge of what it is you're painting is extremely important when you're painting it, because that allows you to do things and paint with a greater understanding and accuracy if you know what it is. I still sound like I'm talking gibberish. Your knowledge makes you a more effective drawer or painter because you know more about what it is. Just text me if you think if I'm sounding too crazy here. And I'm going for the upper lip. But that's to say, it's always worth learning more about the anatomy and the forms that you and the thing that you're painting to be able to be an effective painter. Here I'm getting a little bit of purple colors in the lips. I don't think it is that purple, but I'm liking the way it looks. And then there's the dark part of the lip. I can go with the dioxazine purple in there if I really want it to be punchy, or I can come in with a little bit of the Lizz or impermanent. I do know that this far side of the lips are darker, and that will help it turn into space. So you have a plane that's facing down, but it's more kind of going back in space this way, and then another plane that's going back in space that way. And by separating the colors between the two, it's helpful to lead the eye to understand that they're in two different directions. And again, I have this highlight that's right along the upper part of the lip, and then this is actually lighter than what I painted it. I can just, and maybe a little yellower, I can just go over it with a lighter colored paint and a more yellow color, orange. Here, orange, anybody? Okay. So I'm hoping some of these forms are starting to read now. I have the outer edge of the nose. That'll be helpful to get that outer edge to look like it's pointing towards the side. And there's actually some very narrow color and value changes there that really help point it more sideways. And I don't have the shape of the nostril quite right yet. There's a point that comes down, and then it comes back down, and then it goes up. It's a little bit better. And then we have the outer flange of the nostril is actually coming a little bit lower, and then has the shadow underneath that, and that's very red. And then very quickly next to that, it gets a lot lighter, pinker yellow. Add a little yellow there. Oh, too yellow. Again, what I said about adjusting, like it's all about adjusting what you put down until it starts to look right. Okay, I'm just gonna look. We have 5 people with us right now. I got 2 thumbs up. Woo! And next time I'll do a little bit of planning so I can announce this in advance. I just didn't feel so confident yet about what I was able to do tonight. So I didn't feel like needed to have the whole world in watching my mistakes. But this is going okay. No major technical difficulty except for the wrong size panel in the beginning. I have tons of panels in my basement there. If anyone wants a cheap deal on panels, Speedball, also known as Mona Lisa panels, are extremely inexpensive on Dick Blick, and they're very inexpensive, but they're also, the surface is kind of strange. The surface of the panels are, while they have a texture to them, they're very slick. And I've even tried to paint on them, and the painting wouldn't stay on the surface. Every brush stroke I put down would come up, would pull paint up off the panel. And then I got so frustrated, I decided I was going to try to wipe the paint off the panel, and all of the paint came off the panel. There was not a trace of paint left on it. That's how slick it was. It was so slick that not any of the paint absorbed into the panel. But and then I was going to return all those panels that I bought, and then I decided I was just going to buy a little tub of gesso and try gessoing it and see if I liked it. And after doing several paintings of various passes of gesso sanded down, or just straight gesso, or 2 coats of gesso, I found that just one quick pass of gesso was the right amount for me, with the various stiffness of brushes that I use. And so I have all these panels downstairs, but I only have a few of them prepared at a time. So I have maybe, I want to say 200 panels, close to 200 panels, because they're also cheaper if you buy them in bulk, meaning 10 at a time. And so I have a bunch of sizes that I've purchased, various sizes. To give you an idea of the pricing, any of you have ever used ampersand panels? An 8x10 panel at full cost, meaning they often discount it, but the full cost is about $9 or $10 for a panel. And then sometimes you can find them discounted to about $7 a panel or so. So when the painting surface starts to get into a certain price range, and since I do a lot of I must have said something that sounded like "Hey Siri" because my my iPad started talking to me about panel pricing. Very funny. I totally lost my train of thought. Okay, so sorry, Siri. Okay, so I was saying there about the cost of panels. When the cost of panels are too much, and I'm doing a lot of portrait sketching, then it just feels like, it just makes me nervous that I'm burning through a lot of money just to do a quick sketch. When I first started using the app Sketchy, and I was doing a sketch a day, and I was first doing it on paper and then on panels, paying $7 or $8 a panel just to do a quick sketch was too much. And so the price of these Mona Lisa panels, to give you an example, an 8x10, when I first started buying them, if you could buy 10 at a time, were $1.25 a panel. And that is my sweet spot there, of paying about $1 a panel to do a quick sketch. I could paint with abandon and not worry about the cost of the panels, and now it just takes a quick coat of gesso and off to the races. It's the perfect surface for how I paint. If it has enough absorption and enough tooth to it, those are two separate things, the tooth and the absorption. Tooth, for people who don't know, is really the texture, the surface. It's almost like a surface friction that you get when you rub the brush against it. When tooth is about right, it's almost like it has a little bit of bite to it. And the absorption is the amount of moisture that can sink into the surface. So the gesso actually provides both tooth and absorption. Gesso is a kind of acrylic paint that they must add lanolin or something, some marble dust or something to it that gives it that texture. I think it's probably marble dust, and that gives it the tooth. And then there may be something like chalk or something in it that gives it the absorption. And then it's a vinyl paint essentially. It's like acrylics that are made out of vinyl. And okay, so I've got something a little bit wrong about the hairline there that I can work on, but it's making her face feel a little bit too broad and needs adjusting. So there's some of the hair that's coming out further, and then her hairline is then softer up here and then going up. Okay, that looks a little bit better. I just need to paint it the right value. So it's a darkish greenish color, very close to being neutral, so not a whole lot of color. And then the hair comes out over the ear. I can be a little bit sloppy here in this part. I'm gonna want the extremities of her face to be softer so that they look like they're receding in space. It also gives me an opportunity to have effects that oil paints do very well, which is kind of combination of soft and hard edges. And it's something I actually don't do enough, and I want to find excuses to do it more in my painting, is to have places where the edges are very, very soft, almost like a photograph where it goes, has parts of the photo that are way out of focus. I did a painting recently called Rainbow Girl. I don't know if you can look up that painting on my Instagram account, or did I put anything on YouTube yet? I did shoot a time lapse of it, but I haven't posted it yet. But in Rainbow Girl, and from the photo had her face in sharp focus, and then had the background bokeh'd or out of focus, where the lights in the background, when they say bokeh'd, had that kind of like nice roundish shapes but very soft edges. And so I painted it that way, and so the effect was having her face so sharp and some of the details in her face really sharp, but having the background so soft really gave, it was a really nice effect. Even though it was the effect in the photo, bringing that effect forward in the painting was really really made for a beautiful painting. And so I do want to find excuses to do that more. It's a little distracting when I look at my monitor from my other account, where I can actually see the text. I can't see your comments for some reason on my phone. It says show live chat messages, but it doesn't seem to do it. But I can see all your chat messages on my other account, so on my big monitor, it's easier for me to read. If you have any questions, anyone have any questions out there? Let me just look through. Maybe you have asked a question and I've missed it. Kimberly says those are hard to get in for me, but I'm not sure. Someone else, Kimberly also said slow down. Obviously I'm speeding when I'm painting. Smiles. But that wasn't a question that needed to be answered, more rhetorical. Okay, so I'm going to keep on going. This will be reposted in some form on my channel. YouTube posts it sometime after the live session, so that you can go back or people who missed it can go and watch it, but they can't participate, obviously, because it's already happened unless they have a time machine. So remember what I said, the chin being greener. So I'm trying to keep that idea that in the shadows here, try to keep a little bit of green mixed with the blacks. And I haven't really defined whether the light source is warm or cool. Generally, you want to have a temperature in mind, whether it's a cool light with a warm shadow or a warm light with a cool shadow. Right now, the light looks kind of fairly neutral, and the shadow looks neutral, although there's little bits of green coming in, you can see in the photo. So if the shadows are greenish, then the light's kind of, it'll make the light kind of reddish. So let's go with a warm light and a cool shadow. And I can exaggerate that a little bit, and the effect that we'll have is to make the light feel stronger. And that's by exaggerating how warm the colors are on the light side of the face. When I say warm, meaning higher chroma and more towards orange than they actually are in the photo. And then that helps create that sense of warmth. And a lot of impressionist painters will use that idea. They'll paint the light areas very bright yellow or orange, even though they may look neutral with the bare eye on the scene. If they shift those colors in the painting, that change, it's often called temperature of color, often makes it feel like you can feel the warmth of those colors coming through. And there's other painters that want it to feel closer to what they're seeing and will paint overall grayer, closer to the visible color, and then you won't have that feeling of warmth, but you will have a scene that looks more realistic. That's the right term in that case. It's closer to, I don't want to say a photograph, but it's closer to your visible experience of the scene. Not an exaggeration or color invention to get a certain color experience. So to give an example of a painter who worked in this way is Joaquin Sorolla. He's a Spanish impressionist, would exaggerate those color differences. And when you look at his paintings, it's almost like you have a shock of daylight or a shock of the cool ocean breeze because of the effect that his relatives' colors had on the feeling of the light. And if you have the ability to look up Sorolla and you're not familiar with his work, you will be doing yourself a great favor by Googling it, because he is probably one of the most influential painters of the 19th and early 20th century on painters today. Joaquin Sorolla and John Singer Sargent are really the two. And if you can throw in Anders Zorn into that bunch, then you have the trinity of alla prima painters that have had the most effect on alla prima painters, modern alla prima painters, because of their facility of painting and just the modern approach to their paintwork compared to the academic painting styles of that same period. So right there I'm painting, so it's useful to think in dimension. I'm painting the underside of that ear, and if I get it just right, where the light side is a little bit lower on this side and then coming up, then you really do start to feel that the dimension of the ear there. And if I can get a little bit of red that goes, is sharp and then goes out of focus, then it really does look like it is moving back in space very quickly. The same with the upper side of the ear. Now I'm really thinking about it as spatially. Here's the back tip of the ear, and then it moves forward in space like that. Like I said, when I can start to visualize it in my brain as I'm painting it, then I can get it to more effectively move forward and back in space. So if I get the dark here, where the shadow is underneath that, and can be a little bit punchier, I can even go a little more intensity in the color of the red there. That's the inside shadow inside the ear, and then there's the outer part of the ledge of the ear there. And when all I'm missing now to make the ear feel like it has enough definition is a little bit of that shadow that's going too dark there, but shadow that's inside the ear. And let me redefine the lights there. This is the part of the paint that I feel is like most exciting for me, is when you can have something that looks like whole brush strokes and it defines really well the thing that you're painting, and it looks like it was all done very quickly and effortlessly. I love that, even if it wasn't effortless. I just love the look of that. And the more I can get of that in a painting, the better. That is all looking very good. I just do want to do a little bit of correction on the edge of that ear so that it looks a little bit closer to where it is in the photo. I lost that edge. Okay, let's see if I can get that back here. Too dark. See, it's not effortless. Okay, so let me just evaluate a little bit. Just want a little bit of that light coming up along this edge and down. Okay, good. Feels like an earlobe I can grab. And just along the very edge of her cheek or jaw is almost like a reflected light, that it's saying that there's a light that's coming straight from the side and hitting the side of her cheek, and that's also bringing in some lights in here. So I am going to correct some of the paint that I have here because I can see that it's off a little bit as I evaluate the photo. This is all an adjustment game here, and the nose does come out a little bit further than what I have it. I don't know if you can't see my palette, but I'm gonna take a dip here to show you. It's just all kind of a big mess, pools of color, and I'm just going in and poking at different colors kind of randomly as I see a color that is close to what I want, and I can go in and adjust it. I can't quite get this back to where it was there. Let's get in a little closer. Okay. All right. So, and away we go. Okay, I needed to adjust that. I think the bridge, there's a little green transition here. And I need need to correct the space in her lips a little on the far edge. Measure. It's about right. And I kind of wasn't paying attention to some of these shapes, that they're not quite placed right. And I do want to get a sense of realism, and it helps to get some of the things in the right place, the right color, the right value, the right shape, and not dark enough on that side of the face, so I need to get a little black involved. Really push that value back, and that will help get a sense of turn of the far side of the jaw. Really does go much darker. I can just actually paint that dark into it, and paint that more softly, because it really does kind of blend in. There is a harder line right around here. That's looking better. Okay, so I want to get that other eye in before I get too far along, and I need it in the right place. So I want to get that corner landmark, the tear duct, the right height. No, I just painted it, but nothing was on the brush. Okay, and the right distance this way. I did watch a demonstration of an artist named Mark Tennant, and he is a fairly known figurative painter. And in his demo, he spent maybe 2 hours measuring all the landmarks in the figure in very light pencil before he started painting. And I think it was a surprise to most people, because his paintings look very have kind of a spontaneous look to them. And there was nothing spontaneous about his demonstration. He was really talking about every anatomical landmark that you can see, and talked about proportion, and measured before he even did the full drawing of the subject, of the model that he was painting. He did a little smaller version on the piece of paper first, and then once he got all that set with all the pieces that he wanted to paint, that he only then did he start doing the drawing and the measuring of the full version. Like I said, all that took a couple of hours to do. And then the painting itself, or in this case, it was a charcoal drawing. I think that only took about a half hour to do. And it was kind of interesting, because the way he blended the colors, where it was soft charcoal, that he did the dark area and the light area, and then he just took the heel of his hand and just smeared it together to do the transition of the values from the light to the dark in just one pass. And it just all came together, just that one movement. And I think it just shocked everybody, because it was like nothing was happening. It didn't look like the way it was going to look, and he just made this one move. This was the money move that brought the whole thing together. And there was this sort of like this gasp in the audience. It was at Zoll's studio. It was a packed house. There was maybe I'm glad the fire marshal wasn't there, because it was about almost 150 people in a room that's you probably shouldn't have more than 50 people in, and people were in chairs and standing around the back. But anyway, so there was this gasp as he did this one thing, and I'm sure he does enough demos that it's part of the show, that he knows that that's the part that's going to get the reaction. And but it was that part was fun to watch. But having to sit through 2 hours um, of measuring in very light charcoal drawing that you can't even barely see. I think someone asked him if he could draw it a little darker so that we could see what he was doing, and he said, "Well, if I make it too dark, then you're gonna see the all those lines in the finished work, and the point is to have all that work done very lightly so that it doesn't show up." And so we were just sitting there. We could see him measuring and see him talking about measuring, but we couldn't actually see. Um, and plus, if you were sitting in the back, you couldn't see that much. You couldn't actually see the drawing on paper um, at that point in the drawing. It wasn't until he got a little bit further in that he was making more definite finished marks so you could see those. Anyway, again, take a look up Mark Tennant if you're curious about his work. Um, he works in a way, it's kind of a mixture of contemporary um, and traditional. Um, but again, I think when people thought of his work, that they wouldn't have imagined that he would have be spending so much time on the pure academic part of the drawing, but that in a way was the secret to his results, is that when you do all that preliminary work of measuring and getting everything in the right place and have the knowledge of anatomy and proportion, when you finally get to do the actual finished marks, then you have the confidence to put it down very quickly and cleanly. Um, but it did take a lot of time to get there. Okay. I starting to see this come together. Okay, I see a question. I don't know how long ago it was asked, but did you go to art school? So yes, first I went to engineering school, and I just figured out after getting the degree and a couple years out of school, I began to understand that I wasn't an engineer just because you have an engineering degree. It was actually during a period where it was very difficult to get work in engineering, at least for me. I didn't have the right grades and was not the right candidate for what most companies were looking for. And then, but I really felt deep down that I wasn't really suited for an engineering. I was more of an artist and wanted to draw and paint. So I applied to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. First, to get into the school, I took night classes to build up a portfolio that then I could use that portfolio to apply to the school. And my portfolio was good enough and they accepted me. And so I ended up getting a Bachelor's of Fine Art in illustration and took quite a number of graphic design classes, which was a very good thing in the end, because when I moved to New York and was trying to get illustration work, that there was so much more work doing freelance graphic design than any kind of illustration that I could get. And in the end, I did pick up a bit of illustration. It was never enough to pay the rent, but I was doing a monthly spot for Condé Nast Traveler magazine. I picked up quite a bit of work with Esquire magazine, Food and Wine, and Travel and Leisure magazine, sort of all the food and travel magazines I have done at least a few illustrations for. The Condé Nast Traveler magazine, I did that monthly spot for over a 2 to 3 year period of time. It was for a hotel review section that they had, that they wanted a painted sort of, how do you say it, more like a alla prima painting version of the hotel that was the was the subject, was the featured hotel that they were reviewing, and they would send me photos of that. So anyway, but to get back to the school question, Art Center College of Design, I felt was the perfect place to be. I took their illustration major, which is, if you really wanted to learn to draw and paint, that was the major to take. The fine art major was less about drawing and painting and more about sort of the conceptual, contemporary fine art, and there was not a whole lot of emphasis on drawing and painting skills. It was more about developing pieces that would work in the contemporary gallery system. And so, but illustration was all about learning how to draw and paint and how to use different kinds of media and experimenting with different styles of illustration. It's the point where a lot of students actually developed a style that they would use to market themselves, either as an editorial illustrator or advertising illustration. And during that time, I was just really focused in learning how to draw and paint. And so I didn't really develop a style except to say that it was a style that was based on traditional realism and fairly painterly. And that's still pretty much how I paint today, but have a little more skill than I did back then. I think I pretty much answered that, I think. Feel free to ask more questions if you want. I do have a small audience here of 6 people, according to my phone. And according to my my other account, I can see those. Oh, so cool. Okay, so Malvintius said, "Oh, so cool," and then he asked the question. I assume that that you had just come into the channel and we're seeing the painting. You are seeing it kind of at an angle. Obviously, the photo is very distorted from the parallax view of the camera lens, and then the painting is also not a little bit distorted. I don't know to what degree I can change the angle or edit once I get the reposted footage from YouTube. They do have some editing tools, but I think that will be mostly for trimming the video or changing the color a little bit. But I'm not sure. I work in Adobe Premiere to do the post-production of my videos, and I shoot the time lapse at an angle, pretty much the angle that I'm shooting this at. And then in Adobe Premiere, I use a tool called Corner Pin, and I straighten out all the corners so that it looks like it's the camera is actually more like straight on, and that there's no distortion of the painting. Essentially, I'm adjusting it so it looks closer to the right size in proportion to the actual painting. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that with this video, but that's okay. It's more about the demo itself than the angle. Okay, so let me see where I am right now. I have most of her face in. The background here is going to go mostly dark, and then her neckline drops down below the bottom here. So I have it here. So I'm going to try to quickly work to put in the rest of the background colors and some of the values, so that I'm not so I'm able to put in the correct values in the side of the face. That side of the face is very dark, and unless I've established the color, the values around it, the even darker darks that are in the the hair, it's a little hard to get that to read properly. A little bit of the wrong colors in here in the neck. I need kind of a warm neutral color, and then that shifts to green. And then I have a highlight here where the light is hitting more directly. And the neck. And do a little more measuring. And then, yes, the hair comes down into here. I can really take a lot of liberty with the hair because no one's going to see the photo. Well, that's not true. Usually I post the photo with some of these videos, so you can compare it to the photo, but the hair can be a place where you can really show the brushwork. It doesn't have to be exact. You can be a lot looser and liberal with it, and that can help give the painting more energy. Especially doing things like leaving patches of the panel bare, which I haven't decided I'm going to do here yet or not. Use a little bit of bright yellow, even though that looks too yellow. But maybe orange to get a little more color in here. Highlight. So then I can introduce color into the highlights of her hair. And that'll give it a little more life too. Okay. Here's where I need to do some major adjusting too, because while I've been talking, I haven't been paying a whole lot of attention to whether things were painted in the right place, and there are some parts of her face that just aren't reading right yet. Melvin, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but I'm going to try. Malvinatius says, I'm from Chile, and here you cannot enter by portfolio to art schools just for an academic selection test. Yeah, so no portfolio, I don't know what that means, academic selection. I guess that means based on your academic grades or your academic testing, not on your art skill. That seems like that's kind of strange, because it seems like your success at an art school is based on a level of skill that you have and your willingness to work hard towards improving that, and the academic test doesn't usually show that. But oh well. But that's Chile. I'm sure there are some great artists in Chile, but I'm not sure that the schools are really producing that well. Are you in art school right now in Chile? In Santiago, maybe? Okay, well, might get an answer soon on that. There's a little bit of delay on, I can see on the screen that I have open that, let me see, there's about a 10-second delay, it looks like. So if you ask a question, type a question, I'll maybe get it 10 seconds after you send it. And if I ask you something, you'll hear it about 10 seconds after I ask it. Okay, so there is something off about the jawline, and here this isn't moving fast enough in space, and I really do gotta have the eyes connecting a little bit better. So there's this slant to the direction of her eyes into the ear, and I have that off just a little bit. So when I start to correct some of these things, the face will start to pull together a little bit better. Also have some values off here in the nose. What I'm going to do is, I have a lot of paint on my palette now, and I don't have enough of some colors, so that's making it very difficult for me to mix the colors that I want. And if I am disciplined, then I will stop and put out the colors that I need and clear my palette instead of suffering. Okay, where's my white? You're here somewhere. I threw a bunch of books on top of my colors. Excuse me. I'm diving underneath my palette. Okay. And I'm back. So I've got to put out more white if I'm able to get some clean white color. And I cleared off my palette so I'm able to mix a little bit better. There's some artists that only use a palette knife when they're mixing, and they wipe their palette knife off each time so they don't contaminate their piles of color. That's not me. I'm not anal enough for that. And Angela knows, who works with me, that I'm not a neat freak. So my palette gets to be a real mess. And those piles of colors get to have all kinds of other colors stuck in them. And there we go. Now and I'm doing a lot more squinting now, so I can start to see where things are off. And as I make those adjustments, I'm trying to use the large brush if I can, because that is going to help me. And I'm finding that there's areas on this panel that aren't really grabbing the paint well enough, and that's because I may be using too stiff a brush at this point for the amount of paint that's down, and I may have to shift to a little bit softer brush to get the panel to hold on to more of the paint. But it's doing an okay job right now, so I'm just going to keep on going. And I get a little bit of orange with the black in here. See, it's not really having a hard time getting that the palette to accept the paint. That's all a balancing act. It took me a long time of experimenting to get the feel of having the right surface, the right brush stiffness, just getting all those sort of variables under my belt so that I wasn't fighting it so much. I spent years struggling with doing just what I'm doing now, is painting gestural head studies, gestural portraits. And a lot of times it was just because I was not understanding the materials well enough to feel like I had enough control to do exactly what I wanted. And then it really took painting in my new studio, which is my computer desk with good lighting, and experimenting with the surfaces and the brushes and some of the materials to be able to have that greater sense of control. Each thing that you have, the paintbrush, the surface, the lighting, the subject that you're painting from, in my case it's a computer monitor, all those things are variables that will affect the outcome of the painting. And unless you really have control over those variables, you're going to have a hard time getting consistent results. And that's what I found. I was really struggling. Malvin TS asked another question. She currently work painting portraits. Do you live off of art? Sorry for my bad English. So I while I'm starting to get more and more commissions as I have built up my social media presence, I work a full-time job as a web designer, web developer, and that and my wife also works, and the combination of us working pays our bills. And whatever money that I make off of commissions first goes to pay for my art materials. So in the past, I've for the most part have broken even. I think more lately I'm doing a little bit better, where I'm able to save some of that money, use it towards the kids' education, and we'll see where this goes. I don't plan on quitting my day job, um, and can do both. Right now, I am producing on average about 6 or 7 head studies or portraits a month, and can do that on top of my full-time job and other responsibilities of the household. And so I am, if I get a lot more portrait work, then I'm going to continue to do that the way I'm doing it now, just after hours and on weekends. And so I'm really trying to get these forms to read properly and turn in space properly. So this and I'm trying to do it as subtly as it is in the photo, so it kind of reads the same way, and but make sure that it's still reading, so those forms do turn in space. And similar here with the upper eyelid, I have the edge of this too dark, so while it's turning, it's just reading too differently than the photo. So I have to be a little more careful with the colors and the values there. I need them to be fairly subtle, but I do want to get that turn in space. So here then goes up into the temple, and there's a little bit darker area, and this is what I get into, like paint what you know. Like if you know where these forms turn in space, you make sure that you can look for them in the photograph, so that you can reproduce that same idea. So again, there's a turn in the forehead here, just where I'm putting this highlight, and this highlight is going to help that turn. Again, I want to try to put it in as subtly as it is there. What's throwing me off a lot is the highlight, is the light side of this nose I kind of have in the wrong place. I don't have it far over enough, and so I need to adjust that so enough of this is reading correctly, so that I get the sense of where I am, and it starts to feel real. And again, there's this light area, the bone structure of the nose is catching the highlight, and then it makes a turn, and it's very subtle, the change here, but it is a change. And then as it turns a corner again, and then meets up with the cheek, I forget what this area is called, but there is sort of the softer tissue along the side of the nose that has a very specific shape to it. And then there's the cheek here that it runs into. And all of this is just trying to get that feel of the anatomy that's there, so that those planes in the face start to read correctly, and that it starts to feel like flesh and not just a bunch of paint on the surface. And so I think we are starting to get some of that. I think I need to make some correction to the shapes in the eyes, so that it actually is reading as an eye, the white of the eye, and that it's reading the right size for her face. just make some minor corrections here to really get it to read properly. And I have her pupil too low. I'm going to adjust that if I can, and then I'm going to put in that highlight again. Remember what I said, that the light going through the lens of the eye is lighting the lower part of the iris. So if I can get in a little bit lighter there, even exaggerate a little bit, so to get those puppy dog eye things going, then that's going to help the eye read properly. And you got to get the right shape again to the iris for it to read. And then I have not given her enough white of the eye there, so it's making her eye look a little bit too small. And okay. So that's starting to read a little bit better. I've lost my tear duct, so I'm going to reestablish that. Not sure if this eye is moved around from all the adjusting, so I'm just remeasuring. It's actually pretty close, so not going to worry about it so much, but what I don't have working yet is the eye, the white of the eye turning away in space yet. There is going to be some gradation between the part of the eye that's right against the iris, remember my words, and where it goes into the tear duct. It's got to get a little bit darker in values, so that feels like it's moving back in space, so that eye actually feels round. And that's a little bit better. Let's see if I can get the right angle of this lower part of the lid that's facing up. Again, I don't have the words for some of these things. I just know what I want them to do. I'm not one of those kids that have learned the word to every part of the anatomy. I mean, I know things like the zygomatic arch. I don't even know, I don't even know if I'm saying that right now. My brain is such in visual mode. Zygomatic arch, yes. But I just have kind of a map in my head now of everything, the shapes that I usually see, and that's almost more important than knowing the name of everything, because you're not going to have labels on it when you put it up on the wall. It just needs to look right. There. Okay. And so now I'm just adjusting some of the shapes around the eye so that those forms are turning the right amount. And as I correct those, they'll just feel more like what they're supposed to be. This eyebrow is no longer feeling like an eyebrow. So I don't have the values right. And this needs to be a little softer here. I try not to do too much blending. It starts to have kind of a weird, cheesy look if you blend too much. And part of the beauty of alla prima painting is being able to see the brushwork. So it's it's worthwhile spending the time trying to get some paint on the brush with each brush stroke, you'll see that when I put down a brush stroke, a lot of times I'm going 2 or 3 strokes at a time, but I try to make sure that there is enough paint there to support it. And we're almost, and we're about a little over an hour and a half into this. I probably will paint for another hour or so. So you guys can decide how much you want to stick with me on this. But I will just keep on painting regardless. And I should be able to finish the painting, I think, in that time period. Just to give you an idea, I usually spend about 8 hours on a painting, but I'm treating this more like a sketch. So painting 2.5 hours is enough to get to where I want to go. And I'm not going to worry about likeness quite as much, but I think that the likeness will probably be pretty close because I did a fair amount of measuring. But but it's spending the time going back and forth with the values and slight adjustments in the features to really get the likeness to work. I just want more sort of the effect of the paint to be working properly for the sketch. So there's just a little bit of blue color on the top part of that lid there. I want to get, and it gets even lighter, so I may come in with a little bit of white. Really want to get that sense of light reflecting around in there. And a little more adjustment to her pupil, because it does come further out and does get lighter right in there. Lovely. Okay. And same coming up on the side. There's a little bit harder edge to the outer edge of the I want to say pupil, the outer edge of the iris right there. And if I can get the lashes to read as not just a dark shape, but actually coming out away from the lid, that will help. And still have a few people here with me, which is good. So when I post it, the final version won't look like I'm just painted all alone, but that's okay. The way I kind of imagine this is as I do more of these, I'll announce it further in advance, and so more people can join me. And as they see the posted live videos, they'll be more encouraged, I hope, if they like what they see, to sit in. Oh, I like the way that looks. Okay. So it does look like it's reading properly in space there. Okay. So we got a few things that are still off, or at least off enough that they bother me. There's some measurements that are a little bit off here in the hairline that become important, because if the shape of her head and her face aren't right, then it doesn't feel real, doesn't feel right. And so even more than the features in the interior of the face are the things like the jawline, getting those to read properly, turning right into space, really help with getting the sense of likeness and readability. And I think sometimes I have a hard time talking while I'm doing this because my brain wants to shift into visual mode and not in language mode. So I'm trying my best to keep on talking. Hopefully you're getting enough out of just watching me paint and not so much out of what I'm saying. Okay, and I'm missing the dark underneath her jaw. It's not very pronounced till it gets to closer to the chin. Sort of a reddish, orange, purple something. And this is also off here, the far side of her chin. Made it a little bit too narrow. So again, this is just all about comparing and adjusting. And it doesn't have to be tight, just as long as the relative color and value are in about the right place, and it will start to read. It can be very painterly and the brushstrokes don't necessarily have to follow the form, but if everything's in the right place, the whole thing kind of snaps together. And the closer I get to it matching, having things in the right size, the right place, the right value, what was I going to say? Then the more I am able to see how the painting is off from the photo and can make finer adjustments. And that's the place where I'm getting to right now, being able to make some of those finer adjustments. Darker, more orange. Okay, I can squint and look back and forth between the photo and the painting, and I can see very quickly then where it differs. For example, the nostril is not quite in the right place yet. It's just a little bit higher, a little bit longer. And so the flange too is not coming down low enough. Getting all those things, very subtle adjustments, means that they read correctly in space. And I don't have the edge of the nostril. It's catching a little bit of light, and it's kind of a sharp, has a lot of sharpness compared to some of the forms around it. So I want to try to maintain some of that. Totally wrong color on the brush. Okay. Too dark. You don't have to be very exact initially, as long as you have a way of adjusting. Oil paint is a very forgiving medium. You can do a lot of adjusting. There's other mediums like watercolor can be a lot of, depending on how you work, you may need to be a lot more exact. Okay, just putting in her nose ring now. That's just with a few dark marks. And then on top of that, I'll put some very light marks so it'll feel metallic. You get the shape of her outer edge of her nose a little bit better. And there's just this very subtle shadow here. Getting that in is kind of important because it really does help lift that nose ring off of the surface of her nose. Let's see if I can keep this same brush for doing the highlight on the nose ring. This feels like try not to be too, what's the word, gimmicky with those marks, because then it just starts to look it can look very cheesy if you're not careful, if you exaggerate some of those things too much. But you do need to get enough contrast in those for it to read properly. And see how it does start to look like it's separating properly. And I have a little bit of a accent there along the edge of the nose, and a little bit of darker orange color coming in underneath here. So like I said, just sort of looking, comparing, finding those kind of color and value differences and putting them in. And that's where some of the magic starts to happen, where things just start to look like you can grab them. Takes a while to get there. Got those reds a little bit too exaggerated. Haven't really used the quinacridone red so much, which is a very cool pink red. But I'm gonna try to get a little bit in here just for a little bit of variation of color. And I'm gonna have to reestablish that highlight because I'm losing it a little bit there. Got it really nice and thick, and I'm just reshaping it so that it's in the right place, the right shape. Okay. Do you have an artist family that will encourage you to paint? Okay, so I don't know if all of you can see everyone else's questions. So, Melvinitius, I really am probably butchering your name. Melvinitius, there you go. And there was recently a documentary that was done about my sister. It was about her artwork, but it was also about her mental illness, her battle with mental illness. And that documentary is called Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405. And last month it won, in the short documentary category, it won the Oscar for documentary short, the film about her. So she's the best actress in a short documentary. And so she's an artist, my mom's an artist, and so yes, I guess I am encouraged to paint, as long as I don't quit my day job. I think I can paint as much as I want sometimes. I think I would just, if I'm painting what I want and how I want, I could just paint endlessly all the time. But I think that I do have to balance that with a lot of other things. So at some point I do have to stop. But trying to get this chin to read. And there's a little bit of a light edge again at the bottom of that chin. It's this light reflecting around from the hair back in to her chin. And I need these values here to be right, for I'm losing the credibility of her far cheek. That's a good word, credibility. believability, something where it's not reading properly. So I need to keep on making some of these adjustments until it does read right. I think I have that side of her lip a little bit too high, so I can come in with a highlight and trim it and bring the separation between her lips a little bit lower. I'm glad you guys are sticking with me, because I'm not sure this is that interesting to watch, probably more interesting to do. As a punishment, you may have to make me watch all of you guys paint, so that I will have to suffer the same. Okay. I'm just kidding there. Let's see how many people decide to watch after this is reposted, though. I can follow my YouTube analytics to see how that does. Oh, like that. The look of that. If I get the darks here underneath the nose right, that'll read a lot better. Okay, and I have a little bit too much there. Going to re-establish that highlight again, because it was just a little bit in the wrong place, and that's the placement of that highlight is really important to describing the shape of the nose. Highlights tend to be where things turn in space. It's sort of like where the flesh turns. Usually there's a highlight where the flesh is harder and smoother, like the bone or the tip of the nose, and where things turn. And where something turns, it tends to catch more light, just kind of like a mirror that's turning, or a wide angle lens that's pulling in more light from different directions. And okay, that's looking... got something a little off here still. Just I can back up and look. Just small distances sometimes in places where there's detail can make a big difference in the look of something, especially if it's turning away from you in space and it's off by a millimeter or two, can really look wrong. But it's such a small distance, and that's where having making those finer adjustments really does make a big difference. So I can see that the septum of the nose is not wide enough. I think that's the right word, septum. The center part. Like I told you, I don't remember anatomy names that well. Sometimes I have this little fear, if I'm ever hired to be a teacher, they're going to find out that I don't know the name of anything. And they're going to go, why did we hire this guy? He doesn't even know what to call the thing, the thing below the thing. What's the name of the part of the knee that floats out? The something. They're going to find out that I'm a fraud, and they're going to put me in artist jail. Okay. Okay. Again, if I can just make these subtle adjustments, then hopefully the whole thing will start to come together. The big part is getting this whole part that I haven't resolved yet working. I think everything else is pretty close. Although I do want to define something a little bit more about that eye. Okay, just need to get that shape a little bit better. Okay, let me see. Shapes in her forehead still aren't really well defined, and that's because the transition from light to dark is not really matching what's in the photo and not giving her forehead the right shape. It's like, I hate to be so literal and not really painting what I know here, but sometimes it's just a matter of copying what you see a little bit better. Okay, let's see if we can get the dark side of this face working a little bit better. Because I can make some of these adjustments endlessly and never really get there. Hold on, just need this little highlight in there. Okay. La la la. Still adjusting, sorry. Really doing what I said I would do, but can't help it. Okay, still want to adjust that nose ring a little and get that one secondary highlight in the right spot. Hit it again there. Okay. The bottom of her nose is not really feeling like it's pointed down, and I need to get that working. And I have this part a little bit too light in here. I feel like overall there's parts of the shadow side that are just too light. Okay. Now I need to adjust the jawline, this side of the face, and really get that dark properly, and that's where my black comes in handy. I don't know how people paint without black. It's a big controversy over whether you should have black in your palette or not, but I wouldn't know what to do without it. Okay. Really cut in there more. Okay, I still have a few people with me. That's okay. It's getting kind of late. I am going to paint for another half hour, and then this will be done. Okay, still I have to get that turn in here, so I have to be brave enough to go darker. I have to go maybe 50 shades darker than I've painted right now. And greener, apparently. that's starting to read a little bit better. And all of it go darker. So one problem I have in the dark side of this is I've let there be a little bit too much white paint get into the shadow, and that can have a negative influence on allowing the paint to look as dark as it needs to get. A little bit of white in there makes those shadow shade colors look too light. So I know a lot of artists that they are very careful not to let any white get into their shadow so that they don't have that problem. I am not that careful, so I do have that problem. Okay. And I have that problem here. This lid has to start off much darker on that side for it to read properly, and I do have missing my accents, which go much darker in the shadow. And if I can just get that, continue to paint that a little bit darker, I'm going to be in good shape. The lid has to be darker here. Okay. You're starting to get a little traction. Good. And even that part of the underlid that's facing up that catches the light, I have that too dark. And it looks like I have it too high also. I have to just bring all of this down, lower. I can even start again if I need to, repaint it, because it's not in the right place, and if it's not in the right place, it won't ever look right. That's a little bit better. Reestablish the pupil. I thought I was using black paint there, and I'm using green paint. Okay, I have to find my black because I don't have any more black on my palette. Where are you? I think I was just at the end of my black and needed to open up the new box. That's blue. There's, hopefully I have enough black in this tube. See, there's not very much left. Okay, I think I got enough black out to finish this. Oh yeah, that's better. I have this, her hair that's coming right through the middle of her eye. Let's see if I can get that to feel right without messing everything up. And then move her cheek further in so that the shape of her face feels right. I am now need to focus on putting down finishing strokes. I'm not that far off. I have to make still some subtle adjustments to the shape of her face. Really need to move the chin down a little bit. Lots of white in that spot to overcome the other colors that I already have down. And again, reestablish the darks underneath her chin, because I'm not dark enough. And need to add a little bit, adjust again the shape of her jawline. The jawline is one thing that I usually end up spending a lot of time making subtle adjustments to, because it just takes me a long time to get it to feel right. I don't know why, but I usually just naturally put it in the wrong place. Even if I've measured, my brain wants to put it somewhere else. So it just takes a while of moving it back and forth until I'm getting it into the right spot. And I have some black contaminating my paint there. Let's work on the shape of the mouth a little bit. This needs to come out a little bit further. Then I'm missing this shape, this shadow that's underneath the corner of the mouth. And this is where you get familiar with certain shapes. This shadow shape is the same on a lot of faces that I've painted, and then usually comes all the way down into the jawline. Okay. And where's my quinacridone red when I need it? Here. The light is hitting the lower lip, but there's a small cast shadow from the upper lip on the lower lip. And then there's a transition from that shadow, and then there's the highlight. And then the far side of her lips are moving into shadow, so I don't have that quite dark enough yet. And then there's a much harder shadow that's underneath the lip. Have to get the separation of the lips right first. That's right there. And redder or warmer. And lots of dark green. And then I have to hit that shadow. Sort of a black-red combo. I'm missing the whole shadow underneath her nose. Don't know how that happened. I think I remember painting it out, but I thought I painted it back in. Transitions to red. When I say red, shade of red. That blends, starts to blend with the light of her upper lip. And it's very green there. And darker. Okay. So now we have the values getting a little closer to the values in the photo or the monitor photo, so that I've already said this, but I'm starting to get closer, so it's starting to look like the actual flesh. And I'm going to paint for about 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to call it done, I think. Or at least done for tonight. Who knows how I'll feel about it in the morning. Okay. I want a little bit more green in her forehead here. The quality of the photo is not that great. It's a little bit pixelated. But I get some weird artifacting coloring going on, and I kind of like that. So I'm going to just paint it in similar to what I see. Funky reds and greens fighting each other up here. Don't mind that too much. Make another adjustment to this jawline. And tighten up the jaw a little bit underneath. Oh, overdid it. Okay, so I think some interesting things are happening here with the paint. I'm putting in some bold marks that kind of have a little bit of abstraction to them, and that's adding a lot of interest to the painting. So I am just going to go with that. See if I can keep some of those things going. And that is hopefully going to make the painting work overall, is getting some of those more calligraphic marks going. Because I think this painting does need some of that. Really feel like that lip is not doing the right thing yet. Really need that. Just a little bit of an opening to her lips. And I really want that to read. You can actually see her teeth in that shadow of her mouth. So faint. And kind of a weird bluish color. And then I'm not painting her lower lip quite deep enough. Just again, continuing adjusting. Now I need to adjust the far side of her jaw and the shape of her lips. Some of these little things that are off enough that it's affecting her overall appearance. Just need to get those things right. Pull the bottom of her lip down a little bit. There's some color there, but then as the lip moves into shadow, there's a much stronger red color. And if I get that to read properly, then that's going to help. Okay. And need to hit that shadow. It's black with a little yellow or something. There. Okay, that's starting to look a little bit better. Okay, and the shape of her lip is, the upper lip comes down. So I am painting rapidly to get there. What am I missing then? Just a few marks. Again, if I get some of those calligraphic marks in, that especially little flecks of light in the right place, that will help tremendously lift this painting up a little. I see a very nice blue-ish light on the upper lid that's in the shadow side. Those little color accents will create a lot more interest if I can get them the right value. Oops, got some black in there where I didn't want it. Okay, I want to reestablish that very dark pupil in the shadow. And then get the highlight in the eye. Okay. This seems so boring when I have people watching. When I'm doing this all alone, it never seems boring. But I never think about it in terms of what is it like to watch it. So hopefully this isn't going to be one of those really bad experiments that I regret later. Okay, so I want to continue trying to find places to get some of those blue-green marks in that add a lot more life to this. So right now I'm working back and forth between wanting it to look closer to the photo but also then wanting to get a lot of more interesting color in it. That's what time limit does help with, because if I don't get them in there now, I'm not going to put them in. Okay, and putting those sort of definitive hair-shaped marks coming in. This is where I can do my best Bob Ross to do kind of these sort of happy strokes. She's got this little eyelash that goes off here that's really interesting, and then another strands of hair. Okay, I made that a little crazy, so I'm going to knock it back. That's better. And even though I said that upper edge of her lid was too light, now I made it non-existent, so I'm going to try to add a little bit back in, including the dark edge of her tear duct. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. I am going to do just about 5 more minutes of adjustment, and then it's going to be done. I think this is, overall, it's not looking too bad. And want to keep it loose, kind of out of focus in some spots. But still making good reference to the underlying structure. Let's get some of those highlights in the hair. Like a countdown clock or something, so I can get myself to stop. Okay. I am almost there. Very close. I swear. Okay, 11:05. I am just push the tip of that ear back a little bit, and I think that might be the last thing that I do. Second to last thing I do. Okay, just gonna put my signature somewhere. Okay, that's it. Thank you for joining me. Still have 4 people here. Thank you for hanging in there. And I'm not sure when this will be posted to my channel, but thank you very much. And please give me a thumbs up or a comment, and I'll try to do this sometime soon with a little more warning. Thank you. Don't know how to quite turn this off. Sure you want to stop? Yes. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.